the crazies have it again. And you see Wendy Rogers is proposing some
You said enough
goofiness.
with Wendy Rogers.
So Wendy Rogers has proposed another bill. Wendy Rogers is a senator, state senate, and if you're unfamiliar, she's got a long history of being cuckoo.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't always cuckoo.
No?
There was a time, well, she was the Air Force pilot. She ran for the Senate against Kirsten Sinema, if you'll recall. And
I did not know that.
She seemed like a pretty, am I thinking of the right person?
I think you're thinking Martha McSally.
Oh, maybe I am thinking of McSally. Maybe that's it. Yep. Take everything I just said and just drop it. Throw it out. No, I got him confused.
Hey, it happens.
I appreciate you having the correct information that'll correct me. Because
It's
otherwise,
okay.
I'd have gone to the grave
I was
on
like,
that one.
Air Force
I was
pilot.
Like, yeah, no,
I was
it's
like,
great. I was like, yeah, isn't she great?
Maybe
No.
that was Wendy Rogers.
You're right.
but
I totally mixed those up. Thank you. I'm so glad you said that.
Martha McSally,
Okay.
great person.
Okay, then Wendy Rogers has always been crazy. Let's say long-time
As
crazy.
far as I know,
Long-time crazy person.
a lot of ideas that I don't agree with. Yeah.
I don't hate this idea.
Oh, but I do because it comes from her.
So that's interesting you say that because that shows a certain prejudice against a particular politician where we're skeptical of everything they do. Even if something they do makes sense, we go, what's the underlying reason?
Just like what you said. Don't hate the idea on its face.
Yep.
But once I heard who it's coming from and I start to peel back this onion,
You go,
I'm skeptical.
Okay.
So she's got Senate Bill 1268. She's the sponsor of this. It would require Arizona hospitals that accept Medicaid payments to ask patients for whether they are lawfully or unlawfully in the U.S. and whether or not they're a citizen.
Okay. So most hospitals that have, I think if you're in an emergency room, you have to take Medicaid, I believe. Don't quote me on that one. I could be as wrong as I was with confusing Martha McSally and Wendy Rogers. But again, thank you, Joe, for the save on that one.
Completely forgotten about
But
that.
here's the thing: if you have an ER, you got to take Medicaid, right? Because you're providing these emergency services. So most hospitals take Medicaid. Not all. You do have some private institutions that will not take Medicaid, and those might be something like a surgical center, right? You might have that has decided we're not going to take Medicaid. The reimbursement rate is too low, so we're not going to do that. But most take Medicaid, which means that this bill is going to apply to most every hospital in the state of Arizona.
And it's already in place in Florida.
So, and Texas too, right?
Uh-huh. And you've floated a theory about that as well with our legislature. And, do they want to be more like California or do they want to be more like Texas?
I've always said that Arizona is confused. We can't figure out if we want to be like Texas or like California. We want the industry of California. Specifically, now you're seeing an advancement in the tech industry. But we want the politics of Texas. And most specifically, we want the politics of the most libertarian styles in Texas. Okay. So we get a little bit confused on that. I'm not opposed to this bill on its surface because, as Wendy Rogers points out, there is a federal law that would prohibit you from denying treatment to somebody regardless of any factor. If somebody is having an emergency, you have to treat them. Race, creed, origin, ability to pay, whether they have insurance, their nation of birth, whether they have 6 arms, if they identify as a cat, doesn't matter. If they are having an emergency, you have to treat them. That's it. So Rogers points this out and says, all we're doing is trying to collect statistics. We just want to know how much money is going to people who are here. And now this is really interesting too. We want to know how much money is going to people who are here, either lawfully or unlawfully in the U.S., and whether or not they are a U.S. citizen. So there's going to be 2 questions. First, are you a U.S. citizen?
Okay.
Right? Second question, if the first question is no, second question, are you here legally or illegally? Right?
Okay.
That'll be it. It's a 2-question thing.
Okay. Here's my issue
So
with
what's
that.
the problem? We're just collecting data.
Okay.
No big deal.
So here's the problem with that. The information patients provide won't be reported to immigration authorities. Okay. Answering the question is optional.
Yeah.
There are no immigration consequences.
So I don't even have to answer the question. What's the problem?
That's the problem right there, as I see it, at least part of it. If the question is optional, how are you going to get an accurate sense regarding how much states are spending on health care for people who are not U.S. citizens, who are not legal residents, if they don't have to respond?
It's incomplete and inaccurate data that you're collecting.
So then I go back to the initial question, which is, why do you really want this data? If they don't have to answer, what's the point?
Do you think that if there's a non-answer that she assumes unlawful status?
Well, don't we have a right in this country to keep our mouth shut and not answer things? Pretty sure we do. Isn't that one of the amendments?
No, we have no right.
Why do we always plead the fifth one?
Yeah, I guess that is an amendment. Yeah. Yeah. And I believe in the state of Arizona, we also started something called the Miranda rights, where if you're being arrested, you have the right to remain silent. But you're right. You don't have to respond to anything. But Joe, this isn't the government. This is just a hospital asking the questions for the government. This isn't the gazpacho police. These are just people doing the bidding of the gazpacho police. As always, I know it's not gazpacho police. That's a dig at Marjorie Taylor Greene, who does think that the Gestapo are the gazpacho.
Yeah, Rogers said that it's important to have accurate cost estimates specific to Arizona.
Accurate-ish.
Because if they're not required to answer,
yeah,
and again, even if they do answer, do you know if it's honest?
Right.
So how are we going to be accurate here if we have no means to hold people accountable?
And how many assumptions are going to be made by people that didn't answer? Or will there be wild assumptions that X amount of people answered and lied?
So that's really what it's all about to me.
Here's what she said at a hearing back in February. I want to know what we are paying for. I want to know what we are paying for people who are not citizens. We are elected to protect the citizens of the United States. America must come first. And yes, we are a wealthy nation, but we won't remain wealthy if we keep giving everything away with no accountability. Isn't that in contrast to what she said about you can't deny care to anyone?
A little bit.
So that's really interesting. She also complains about the cost of things, and yet get a load of who opposes her bill. The Arizona Medical Association, the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, Honor Health System Alliance, or the Health System Alliance, not Honor, but Health System Alliance, and they represent many Arizona hospital systems.
I know a lot of hospitals have issues with this.
They're all opposed to her bill.
Yes.
She says we're wasting money on it, and yet the Arizona Medical Association, the hospitals, and the Chamber of Commerce all oppose her bill. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't they be the ones that would say, well, what a waste of money. We can't be wasting money on these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. What's the problem here?
She says, we will know whether they are citizens. No, you actually won't, because it's an option.
But even if they say, yeah, I'm not a citizen.
And we need to account for the dollars that are flowing out the door.
All right, but get this now. Eva Birch, Democrat, Mesa, who's stepping down, by the way, because she says she can't afford to be in the Senate any longer because they only pay $24,000 a year. She says it's going to increase the reluctance for people who need medical care, and they're going to be less likely to seek care because of this legislation. If that isn't the intention, I think it's important that's understood. So she's saying if you're doing an immigration check, even though you're claiming it's not, but you're requiring that they ask the question for everybody that's there, then people are going to go, I don't even want to go to the hospital because they're going to find out that I'm here without documents. And as we know from some of the ICE moves, they have removed some protections from places like churches, schools, and hospitals. So you may have people that go, I don't want to go in and get my broken finger taken care of because I might get deported.
Is that what Wendy Rogers wants too?
You know, according to her, she just wants accurate statistics. But then she says, in response to Eva Birch, she says, then they should stay home in their home country if they want to have care. But again, doesn't she also say we can't deny care to anyone? It's federal law. And doesn't she say we won't remain a healthy country if we keep giving everything away with no accountability? And doesn't she say now that people should stay in their home country, which doesn't sound racist at all, if they want care? It sounds to me like she literally wants to deny care to people at hospitals, in emergency rooms.
If they're not legally in the U.S.
If they, and again, they can lie. What's the next step? It's obviously,
or they don't have to answer the question at all. They can leave it blank.
Well, they could just lie. The next logical step is show me your papers, right? Because too many people are lying. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what the goal here is, right?
I think so. which is why I have a problem with this.
But I'm all for stats. Now, maybe you think we're being tough on Rogers by assuming her motivations. Okay. It's a fair criticism, and usually we try not to pretend that we know what drives other people. But with Senator Rogers, the track record is pretty clear. The argument for what's under the surface is next. Thank God Joe is here today because he helped me as I confused Wendy Rogers with Martha McSally earlier in the program. Thank you so much, Joe.
It's okay.
Oh, I really boned that up. I feel really embarrassed about it. Wendy Rogers, however, who is nutty, and Martha McSally, who pretty sane. Okay, big contrast. The story, by the way, is not about McSally at all. It's all about Wendy Rogers because the senator from Flagstaff, who has a trailer outside of Flagstaff and a $750,000 home in Chandler that she doesn't live in because she's busy living in a trailer in Flagstaff, she sponsored a Senate bill that would require Arizona hospitals that accept Medicaid payments to ask patients whether or not they are lawfully or unlawfully in the United States and whether or not they are U.S. citizens. She says initially that it's just to collect some data. But then when she was pressed, and it didn't take much pressing, for her to say this is all about denying care to people who are here without documents. That's it. She did make clear that there's a federal law, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, that prohibits hospitals from refusing or delaying treatment to a patient regardless of any factor, saying that patients are protected in terms of getting care.
Okay.
But when she was asked about the bill and what the motivation is and what's the point, and she says, we need to know how much money we're spending on non-citizens. And we won't remain a wealthy country if we keep giving everything away without accountability. So she's trying to collect data so that she can, in the future, make an argument about denying care to people who are here without documents.
It sure feels that way to me. But
That's literally what she's saying she's doing.
Yeah, I mean, the problems with their current bill, though, too, is it's all optional. So you're not going to get accurate data.
Nope. Which means she's going to be filling the blanks with assumptions.
And, I mean, she's never done anything like that before.
You know, it's funny you say that because if you recall back in 2002, she was not at the CPAC. CPAC is the Conservative Political Action Conference. Instead, she went to the AFPAC.
What's that?
That is, if CPAC is not far right enough, AFPAC steps it up a notch. The
So AFPAC?
Yes, the America First Political Action Conference.
Okay, well, a lot of people are America First. What's AFPAC?
Well, the AFPAC does have some ties to some white nationalists.
Okay.
Yep, and so she went and spoke there. If the AFPAC is a counter event to the Conservative Political Action Conference. In other words, somebody said, you know, CPAC is great, but not great enough, and we need to do some counter programming. In the same way that the Democrats are holding a rally, so the Republicans will hold a counter programming, right?
Sure.
They're doing their big debate, so we're going to do this big rally over here to try to draw some attention to it. It's counter programming. The counter event to CPAC is the AFPAC, organized by Nick Fuentes, a far-right white nationalist who said during one session that some are comparing Russian President Vladimir Putin to Adolf Hitler, as if that's not a good thing. Those were his words. Yep.
I had a host tell me one time decades ago, he said, anytime Hitler comes up in any argument, just know that side that brings up Hitler generally losing.
The only problem with that is that at some point we have Hitler. And then if you bring up Hitler to say, this guy's a lot like Hitler, and they go, it means you lose your argument. That's a great way to allow Hitler to take over again. The minute you shut down any comparisons is the minute you are intentionally ignoring history. And what do we know? If we don't learn our history, we're doomed to repeat it. Right, exactly. So anyway, she goes to this deal, and then she said that that they're all patriots and that the other Republicans should be hanged. And then what happened is the Republicans in Arizona went, hey, you need to fall back and not say that anymore. And she said, nope, and she doubled down on that. So she got censured by the GOP in Arizona in 2022 for showing up at that. Then if you remember in 2022, there was that shooting in Buffalo at the grocery store. And it was a dude that was super racist. And so then we were like, oh, my goodness, I can't believe that this super racist came in here and was trying to kill people. This is a horrible mass shooting. This is terrible. Can't believe that this happened. So as news of the mass shooting in Buffalo was just becoming known, Rogers tweeted, "Fed boy summer has started in Buffalo."
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah. So they're thinking, she's leaning into some nuttiness once again. She said, as she was asked about that, she said, "Sadly, my comment was taken completely out of context and became a false narrative that's now a focal point of a firestorm created by a certain race-obsessed members of the media." And then she goes on to say, she does not condone violent crime or racism. I do not condone violent crime or racism unless it's my friend, Nick Fuentes, who says Hitler was pretty great.
Now, well, we were talking about something last week where Wendy Rogers' name came up too.
Yes. What was that deal? That was a bill that was being proposed. Which one was that?
That dealt with, was it Jewish people?
Well, that was the one where they were trying to replace psychologists, school psychologists, with Jesus.
That's what it was.
So she pitched the bill, and according to some Republicans, they said Jesus is better than a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And Arizona Republicans want to replace chaplains in public schools with.
But how did she come up?
Want to replace psychology with? It was her bill.
Okay.
Yeah, there were other Republicans that were commenting.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I thought that story also mentioned some of the other.
Well, David Marshall from
not so
Snowflake.
great things that she's been accused of.
Oh, yeah, that one did point out some other Rogers history. Let's see. Rogers is a far-right extremist, has embraced white nationalism. In 2022, spoke at a white nationalist conference. That's the AFPAC I was telling you about.
Mm-hmm.
She said the attendants were patriots, and then she advocated for the murder of her political enemies. She did mention gallows, so I don't know if that's murder so much as just executions. She also said that she is honored to be endorsed by prominent anti-Semitic Christian nationalists and regularly traffics in anti-Semitic tropes, and Rogers has advocated racist theories, appearing on anti-Semitic news programs and aligning herself with violent anti-government extremists. But other than that, I'm sure she's lovely.
So when I see her attach her name to a bill, even if I think, like you...
And this one has to do with immigration,
like, hey,
of course.
This seems like an okay idea on its face. You dig a little bit deeper.
No.
And
if given the chance, Rogers would turn away a person bleeding in the ER if they can't show their papers.
If you can't prove that you're here in the U.S. legally, she wants you to take a hike.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.